Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and today we've got an awesome guest that brings the energy. Why? Because I'm pretty sure she has one of the coolest jobs in the world. She has an incredible client roster. Her business does so much good work across so many different industries, including she's worked in the video game industry, which my inner child is so excited to hear more about her experiences. So let me tell you about today's guest. Her name is Robin Boyar. She previously led the research team for Electronic Arts, which is obviously a huge video game company. I grew up playing so many of EA Sports' brand names and video game titles such as FIFA and so many others. I've got a lot of love for her career background, but now Robin heads up her own business called Think Tank Research, where they offer customized market research, which includes surveys, focus groups, user experience testing, to help clients validate product concepts, test user experiences, and determine optimum positioning. These are things that most entrepreneurs and business owners on a small scale don't think of or think that they can't tap into these insights. But Robin is really going to open our eyes today to the power of her methodology and the way that we can leverage this in our own businesses with our own products and services. Their key areas of expertise are technology, video games, and healthcare, but so much of Robin's philosophy and methodology is going to spark us to start asking better questions in our own industries and our own businesses. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview today with Robin Boyar. All right, Robin, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to have heard about just all your childhood fun times playing EA Sports. So great to connect.
Yeah, I love it. It's funny. I almost want to be like, well, Robin, you predicted it because that's at the core of your powers. But before we get into predictive and data and all the other good stuff that you do, fill in those gaps. Take us beyond the bio. Who the heck is Robin? How did you start doing all these such incredibly cool things that you get to do?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So I'll sort of go back. It's a very long career. I've been in market research for over 25 years. And so when I first started, I'm embarrassed to say pre-internet, I was doing educational technology, looking at how kids use technology to learn and play. And then the internet boom came around when I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. So worked for a couple of online companies, did research in kind of the first, if you can imagine, the first online surveys, first usability testing, and then worked at a startup online game company called Pogo. They're still around. And they were acquired by EA in 2001. And that really brought me into doing market research, video gaming. I built a team from scratch at EA. Was there for a little over 6 years. And then since then, I've been on my own. This is, if you can believe it, my 16th year with my own company.
Yes, I love that overview. Robin, fun fact, I am also in my 16th year, so kudos to the longevity. I think we need to celebrate longevity so much more within the world of entrepreneurship because it shows a lot of good things and it also comes with a lot of experiences, both good and bad along the way, all of which taught us so much. So we're going to get into so many of those things here today, but we have to start with that very term that you already introduced to us, which is market research. I feel like way too many entrepreneurs, it's that classic case of ready, fire, aim instead of ready, aim, fire. And obviously research is the tool that we can use to aim correctly before we fire. What the heck does market research mean in a world where so many people skip that key step that could set them up for success?
I mean, if you go back to just what market research is, just looking at the definition of it, it's basically researching your market. And, I think what happens is a lot of entrepreneurs get really excited about an idea. And sometimes it's really based on sort of their experiences that they've had in a particular market where they're like, oh, I see that there's something that's missing. And so it's really well aligned with their, with the market research and sort of the competitive landscape. But ultimately, market research is really at its very basic definition, just understanding how customers interact with a variety of products. And obviously for the entrepreneur, how do you actually develop either a product or a service that's going to meet the needs of those customers?
Yeah, I really like that overview, especially because I'm sure we're going to dispel a lot of myths in today's conversation. One of which is a lot of entrepreneurs will say, well, Robin, Brian, I have done market research. I asked all my friends and family if they think my business is a good idea. And Robin, inevitably, we'll all be told, yeah, that's a great idea because people want to be supportive. These tools that obviously you have so many different tools in your arsenal, surveys, focus groups, user experience testing. Talk to us about some of those things and how they're obviously a lot of your job is science backed, is research backed. Talk to us about those better ways and the flaws in kind of those superfluous ways that a lot of people just ask their friends and family.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that the first step in asking your friends and family is not a bad step. I think the problem is that a lot of entrepreneurs don't go beyond sort of that second degree of separation. And so what happens is, as you alluded to, is that friends and family, they don't want to be negative. They don't want to, shall we say, piss on your parade. But what you really need to be able to do is look at who is your representative audience, and then whether it's qualitative or quantitative, so qualitative being like focus groups or interviews, quantitative being like a large-scale survey, really get a sample set of consumers who are really reflective of your target audience. And so I think, for example, with a survey, the best surveys, there's a rule of thumb that you want to have at least a minimum N of 400 to actually survey consumers, which for entrepreneurs may be hard to find 400 people who actually either use or are interested in your product. But that's one way that you can actually sort of look at your target audience is by doing a large scale survey like that. Again, not just talking to like your friends or, your friends of friends, but actually really talking to people either through, let's say, focus groups or interviews, which can be done with 8 or 15 people and will start to be predictive, or with a large scale survey where you're actually literally surveying hundreds of people.
Yeah, I'm really glad that this is where we're starting and you've already opened our eyes to the who that we're asking these questions of, because that's the most important. If you and I are launching a dog food brand and we start asking cat owners what they think of it, that totally none of their input is going to make any sense for us. It's not going to be valuable in the sense that why are we doing this research in the first place? Well, you already used the P word today that I think we're going to refer back to so much, which is predictive. We want to predict, is this going to be successful? Yes or no? Because ultimately that's why we're going to do that research. With that in mind, I want to start on the qualitative side because I'm sure that your outputs are only ever good as your inputs. If you're asking great questions, you'll get great insights. Ask bad questions, you're going to get totally useless insight. So, Robin, where do we even start in beginning to understand what are the right types of questions to ask with that end goal of predicting product market fit, yes or no?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things you want to learn, and what we learn as researchers, is how do you ask unbiased questions? Because the most important thing to understand is research even goes beyond just asking, hey, are you interested or not interested in this product? The best, let's just say, product research is when you really have an understanding of the foundational landscape. And then you can start to ask a variety of unbiased questions around, hey, you actually, let's use the dog food example. You're a dog owner. Okay. Tell me a little bit about, why you buy the food you buy. What do you like? What don't you like about the food? And then from there, you then start to generate more specific questions. But generally speaking, what you want to start off with when you're doing qualitative research is to first and foremost ask very open-ended, unbiased questions about not only the category, but what's working and what's not working. And then you can start to build into the how interested would you be in a grain-free, low-calorie dog food that's organically da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, I love those insights. I guess where my brain goes hearing you talk about those things is because I'm putting my thinking cap on and I'm saying, well, yeah, what would research look like in my industry? Obviously, let's use the podcast as an example. I'd love to hear from entrepreneurs about the types of content that they consume. Why are they consuming this content? And I guess where my head goes, Robin, is I'm just like, how do I get them to tell me the real stuff as opposed to what they think I want to hear? Is it by having an external strategist like you come in and say, hey, I have nothing to do with this. I'm just facilitating understanding you. Is it an external party? Is there a way for us as entrepreneurs and business owners ourselves to get people to tell us the right answers? How do you create that environment that will yield the right answers?
Yeah, Brian, one of the things that I think you nailed is it's the environment. So you want to create an environment that's unbiased, that's open, that's welcoming to feedback. So one of the things that I've seen in my career for 2 decades is you'll have what we'll call like the product owner. So let's say an entrepreneur saying, well, tell me, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? You know, do you like it? Do you not like it? Like they're bringing to that conversation, that sort of energy that isn't really allowing a consumer to just very open-mindedly talk about whether it's a category or a product or a potential, product. So whether it's you that's going to be asking the questions or whether it's going to be hiring a trained researcher like myself, the key is that you really want to make the people that you're asking the questions about feel really comfortable, that they're going to feel comfortable, giving you positive feedback and negative feedback. And a lot of that is just, really just having a neutral sort of POV, just to be, not only in your body language, but in the questions that you ask, in how you ask it, where you ask it. It's really just important to really provide I almost sound like a therapist saying this, but a very safe space where people can just be open and honest, and they're not going to be judged for, one answer or the other answer. And that's really, really hard to do. I've been moderating focus groups for 20 years, and it's a hard skill to just be, very zen and very open.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely appreciate that. Especially, I went to business school and part of it was we were always invited by brands. A lot of them were local businesses who didn't have that scientific approach to research like you do. And they teased us with Amazon gift cards and free pizza. So of course we went. A lot of times we were just saying the answers that would get us kind of the prize at the end that we were looking for. And it certainly wasn't that more scientific approach. But when I look at your client roster, Robin, it is the who's who of all the cool companies out there, from National Geographic to Nike to PlayStation, Warner Brothers, so many cool companies that you've had the opportunity to work with. I'd love to get some real life insights because a lot of listeners, conceptually, we understand the power of market research. We understand the concept of being able to predict our success based on actual data, but give us some of those real life insights as to when and why these brands decide to go this route.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just really been, first and foremost, an honor to work with some of the best brands, in the world, quite frankly. And I think the most important learning that I've had is that when you're working with brands like this, who really are the best in the business, they want to stay that way. They've actually been, for the most part, really disciplined and really thoughtful about the products and services that they've created for customers. years. So when they typically bring me on board, it's because they want to continue this legacy of great products. And so first and foremost is really having a partnership with them so that we can say, hey, what are you trying to do? How can we, get the best insights for you so you can build a better whatever it is that they want to build. And it really is a partnership. And so that's really critical in my mind, is to start and to build that partnership accordingly.
Yeah, I love those insights. And you're right. I will very happily brag for you, because listeners can actually check out your website, which we're going to talk about at the end of today's episode. It is thinktankresearch.com. We'll talk about your website at the end, but you've got your client roster right there. And for me, looking at that, I love that you highlighted these are the best of the best, so they want to stay there. This isn't something you do at the beginning and then you just say, okay, that's it. I know that this works and my business is generating revenue and I've got customers and clients and it's growing. They continue to want to stay there. I think it's the hardest thing in life, not just business, is to stay at the top. Getting there's one thing, staying there's another. Robin, from that small business perspective, a lot of listeners might be thinking, well, okay, I have proof of concept. I already have clients. How can these types of research tools and strategies actually benefit us to continue to grow, to reach that top? But most importantly, it's what's sticking with me from the way you talk about this is to stay there.
Yeah, so I think what often happens with entrepreneurs is that they'll get to a point where their growth will stall. I spent my career in tech, and so we always talk about, the hockey stick growth that, you ideally want. So, what's important to recognize is if you've got organic exponential growth, then you're on the right track. But if you're starting to see it stall, then you really have to take a step back and understand, okay, is it stalling because I've just got a very limited audience? Is it stalling because something has changed with my product or service offering? Could be anything from, price or that you changed a component and now the quality is off. And so I think one thing that's really important is recognizing that sometimes you can get those first kind of customers, but then you have to realize, how can you grow past that initial set of customers and recognize what's really impacting that growth. And a lot of entrepreneurs really, when I talk to them, because we do a lot of work with startups as well, they struggle in, getting to that critical mass, that next step. And it's just important to recognize, okay, why is that? Why is your growth stalling?
Yeah, really important insights there. And that's what makes these extraordinary brands as great and impactful as they are. If Starbucks opened their first location and they were just like, we want to open a second location in Seattle, and they did that, then they would not be the company that we've heard of here today. And whether you ever become a national success or someone who just makes a deep and profound impact in your own industry, for all of us, we can glean these insights from Robin, from her experiences with those great brands to dominate our own markets, however big or small that means in our own corners of the world. So I really appreciate that, Robin. I'm going to toot your horn a little bit more, because part of your superpowers is that not only can you do the research, not only do you know how to ask the right questions and get the right data, but then providing or figuring out what to say or do from that data. That is the important part. Talk to us about that superpower of yours. When you're sitting on, let's say, whether it's a survey, a focus group, whether it's some quantitative data that you've gotten your hands on some data sets, how do you start turning that into some actionable business strategy?
So first and foremost, it goes back to having that conversation with, whether it's yourself, whether you're the customer that's doing the research, or it's your clients. Like, what are you trying to get out of the research? And so I always go back to that question, and I'll sometimes even ask our clients, what do you really want to get out of this? What specifically do you want to do with the research, once you have it? Because, you can go a lot of different ways in terms of, research deliverables, but ultimately you want to be aligned with what do you want to get out of this research? So for example, imagine that, the goal of your research is that you want to understand why customers are canceling their subscription. So it's pretty easy then. It's just kind of looking at the data to understand, okay, where are those barriers to engagement? What things are making people unhappy that they're canceling? But ultimately, you have to have a very clear understanding of what are those questions that you want to answer so that you can then provide that final actionable finding for whether it's yourself or for, clients.
Yeah, I really like those perspectives, because the other thing that's layered on for me is that what's unique about you is you've spent so long in the tech industry. And Robin, in a world where so many people are afraid of tech still, we are at the cusp of a lot of really incredible changes within the world of tech. Obviously, AI is kind of the elephant in the room that a lot of people are afraid to talk about. I'm super curious to hear from your perspective with your forward-looking cap on. Where do you see AI fitting into this mix? Because a lot of people are worried about it replacing all of us, but the reality is it's going to complement so much of the work that we do. It's going to give us even more powers in our arsenal of tools. What's your perspective on how AI is going to make all this stuff even more actionable and insightful?
Yeah, I'm not that worried. It's so interesting. People are always worried about AI. And I think, the one thing that people tend to forget about AI is that it's actually, the models are built on human behavior. So, it's not unlike, a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. And I'm dating myself here for those of you who remember what would happen if you Xerox something and then Xerox something again and then Xerox it again. The fidelity would get worse and worse and worse. So the way that I think about AI right now is that it's really a complement to human action. So for example, if you're doing a survey and you've got hundreds or thousands of responses from customers, it may be really difficult for just one person to read through all of those. And that's a great area of opportunity where AI can just analyze that data in, if not minutes, hours. And so what I think, though, ultimately what you want to do is nothing really beats, reading something or, doing something on your own and then using AI as a complement, almost as, let's say a checker, if you will, back in the day when we were in grade school and we had like a classmate, double check our work. That's the way that I think about it right now. You can't be scared of it, but also recognize that there is that opportunity for it to go haywire because of that, Xerox effect, if you will.
Yeah, I'm glad that you told us the answer to what happens if you Xerox a Xerox. In my head, Robin, I was like, I'm going to have to Google that afterwards. But thank you for that. In my head, I was just like, oh, it's just like sharing or saving a JPEG and then resaving it and screenshotting it and re-screenshotting it. So yeah, I actually love that illustration. As a very visual person, I can totally see that. But it also makes me realize, I think that I'm a little bit a part of the problem here, because so much of our conversation today, when I talk about predictive models, I'm talking about yay or nay, but obviously it goes much more beyond that. What I'm thinking is, Robin, as entrepreneurs, when we talk about our positioning in the market, when we talk about our messaging in the market, are these types of insights, and I'm not going to ask a yes or no, obviously I know the answer is yes there, but what other types of insights can we glean from market research rather than just, hey, is this a good idea, yes or no?
Yeah, well, positioning is really key because I think that ultimately, what you need to do is not only recognize whether or not people are interested in something, but, what's going to drive purchase. And so, I think about like Stanley Cups, for example. I'm like, what is it about Stanley Cups that, they've been around for 50, 60 plus years and they're now just like the thing to have. There was a total run on like the Starbucks Stanley Cups a while ago. And so I think what you have to recognize is anytime you have a product and service, is it aligned with sort of the customer ethos and also just cultural culture at large. So if you think about the Stanley Cup example, I think now more than ever in life, people want to drink a lot of water. They want to be healthy. They want to, show off that, hey, I'm doing things that are good for me. And so that's a perfect example of how you've had just a very simple, one could almost say just a very, average object, succeed because of new positioning.
Yeah, I'm so glad you picked that example of Stanley Cups because you're right. I saw a chart recently of their revenue 2 years ago was like, $100,000 or $300,000. I forget what it was, but it was a 6-figure number. And all of a sudden they've blown up. They've become a $100 million company on the back of, I don't even know where it came from. I'm like you. Is it a TikTok trend? Who knows what it is? But that leads me to pick on your background a little bit because I'm so fascinated. I can't let you go here today without talking about the video game industry because that is one that is incredibly competitive. I think back to when I was a teenager. Gosh, I loved dragging my parents to GameStop with me, and every wall from floor to ceiling is covered in video game titles, which there's a lot that goes behind it. There's the cover itself. There's the name of the game. There's the price point. There's so much that goes into it. The split tester in me feels like it's a researcher's dream. Robin, with that hat on, give us some of those industry expert insights. What contributes to the success? When we talk about predicting the success of video game titles, what are some of those ingredients at play that you studied?
Yeah, it's really interesting because that is a heyday that unfortunately, despite all the, discussion about the resurrection of GameStop, I don't think will ever come back. That exciting retail model of it's Thursday, the latest video game has come out, can I get my parents to drag me there? So, if I haven't pre-ordered it, is it still going to be in stock? What I think is really intriguing about that is that a lot of that was driven by not only word of mouth, but also the brand of the video game itself. And then lastly, in the case of EA Sports, gosh, all the energy and thought that went into, okay, who's going to be the cover athlete this year? It was a very different time where people like yourself back in the day were actually buying a game based on not only the title, but, the word of mouth, what they saw in magazines, what they saw, at the GameStop. Whereas now, because a lot of that information has been democratized. You can go onto Reddit, you can go onto Discord, you can go onto YouTube. I think its positioning as it relates to video games is a little bit less impactful than it was back in the day when you're like, oh, this game actually looks really cool. The cover art is super neat. I think things have changed a little bit for better or for worse.
Robin, you're bumming me out because you just brought back all the teenage memories. You're right. It was one of those things. I would wait for release day. I would always get my pre-order in for FIFA and Grand Theft Auto. Those were the two games that I played the most of. And we all waited. The GameStop manager would call us and say, your copy has arrived. And it was like the most exciting day ever. We didn't have to wait for Christmas. It was really cool. But you're right. Probably a lot of kids today don't have that. But it does make me realize the new kids on the block. You brought up some of those online discussion places like Reddit, for example. It's something I lean on a lot when I'm thinking about buying anything, whether it's shoes or a piece of technology, camera equipment especially. I hop on subreddits and I read what other people are saying. How do those external tools, we've obviously talked about surveys and focus groups, how do those external tools feed into, or do they feed into the research that you do? Because there's a lot of people out there talking in public about this stuff.
Oh, totally. I was just on Reddit this morning because I was looking into a beauty product and I wanted to know what people were saying about it. So I'm the same way. It's really interesting because my video game research colleagues and myself have a very nuanced perspective as it relates to Reddit, because there are folks that are gaming professionals who the only audience that they talk to is on Reddit or Discord. And in those cases, they're often just talking to the hardcore of the hardcore. And, there's a risk there because you're only talking to a very, very vocal, specific audience. So it may not address your overarching needs for, a larger audience, especially if you have a game that, has 50 or 100 million users. So the way that I think about it personally is that I think it's a complement. The Reddit and Discord communities are a complement to the other types of research that you can do, whether it's doing surveys, whether it's doing usability or playability testing. But ultimately, it always comes back to, it's a phrase that I used to use at EA all the time. I'm like, does this person have a PhD in gaming, or are they more of like an average Joe? And you've got to recognize, who they are, because that's going to impact what they're going to be telling you.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm really glad that you brought that up, and especially that we're going here in the conversation. I don't want to let you leave just yet, Robin, because
I'm free. So you feel free to ask all the burning questions you ever wanted to know about FIFA. Or I don't think you mentioned that you played Madden, but I'm happy to answer them if I can.
I love it. No, honestly, because I guess part of me is thinking that, yeah, you and I are obviously geeks about all of these things that we're talking about. And when we bring up Reddit in specifically, when I go to Reddit, I'm getting like the true camera head perspectives on it. Whereas if I'm not into a hobby, like, I guess I'm not really into a hobby, but I guess I wish I could pull on one. Shoes, for example. I don't really care about shoes. I don't need a sneakerhead's perspective on these shoes. I just want to know, hey, if I walk 5 miles a day, are they going to be comfortable? Yes or no? And there is that risk of selection bias in there, which leads me to, I guess this is a super nerding out. I specialized in econometrics when I was in school, but I guess part of it is like, where in that curve do we care about the research? Do we care about the mass market appeal, that bulk in the middle? Are we looking for the extremists because they have really informed opinions? How do we balance that out in our research?
I think it depends on what you want to do with the product. So like, this is a very old use case, but back in the day, in like the PS2 years, like when Gran Turismo was the like best simulation video game out there for driving, like, one of the things, and again, this might be an urban myth, but this is what people have told me, is that they again started to talk to those PhDs, those folks who actually, spent hundreds of hours playing Gran Turismo. And what ultimately happened is that the game became too difficult for like the average racing enthusiast. And so what happened was that over time, because you didn't have that mass audience, the game suffered because it became too difficult. So I think ultimately you always have to think about, okay, are you just, getting the feedback to your point, like, I just need a pair of sneakers that look really cool, or is like, hey, my podcasting career depends on me having very clear and concise, audio support. So I need the best of the best. I think, you've got to think about what your source is and how you're going to be using it.
Yeah, that's really cool insights, Robin, especially because growing up, I used to always play Gran Turismo with my little sister. And you're right, the game got to a point where it was so freaking good that it became harder. And we were two teenage kids. We didn't know anything about braking around corners, but that became essential to it. I remember when they introduced 5-hour-long endurance races, and that's when me and my sister were like, let's just go outside and play soccer instead, because you reach that part of the market. Whereas you're right, the hardcore extremist racers, they probably loved that pivot from their direction. So gosh, the fact that all of your business case studies are also related to video games makes this for a really fun episode for me, Robin. So thank you. With all of that... Yeah, with all of that in mind, I always like asking my guests the hardest question of the episode, which is, with all this stuff that we talked about today, so much strategy, so many tactics to go along with that broader vision of strategy, what's that one takeaway for so many entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs out there listening saying, gosh, Robin, I know that I'm not doing any of this and I want to start implementing it in my own business. What's that one takeaway that you have? And I guess for you, actually, I'm going to make it even more challenging because you're super super analytical and you have a lot of insights and longevity as an entrepreneur. I'd love to hear your answer twofold. One, with your researcher hat on, but two, entrepreneur to entrepreneur. I'd love to hear that insight as well.
You have made it really hard. I think from a professional standpoint, it's ultimately about knowing who your customer is and what they want and delivering upon that. I mean, that's what you need to be doing professionally. And it goes back to what we talked about before. Do you really understand the competitive landscape? Do you really understand the pain points that your customer is engaging with? Are you able to provide a service or a product that actually addresses those pain points, that actually provides a pathway of opportunity? That's professionally what you need. I think that ultimately, as an entrepreneur, what you need to be thinking about is how can I deliver the best service to my customers, whatever I'm selling, whether it's coffee or Stanley mugs or lip gloss, like what I'm going to be doing, how can I be the best at that? Because I think a lot of people think that being an entrepreneur, it sounds great, you're your own boss, but ultimately it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of critical thinking. And if you don't have those two, and I think the critical thinking from the professional answer that I gave you, but then also the discipline, that's really what you need, is you really need the two of those to be successful.
Yes, amen to that. That's the real advice that I love on this show and why listeners continue to tune in after all these years, 5 episodes a week, because that's the real stuff, Robin. So I appreciate you sharing that with our audience. Listeners, you see, Robin has been in business for 16 years. Why? Because she understands this real stuff. This is what it takes. Success leaves clues. So go back and re-listen to that answer from Robin, because you heard both sides of that coin. Obviously, the discipline that it takes along the way, but really deeply understanding the people that you serve. If you don't get these things right, you're not going to be in business for 16 years like Robin has been. So really good insights, Robin. I so appreciate those. I know that listeners are going to be keen to check out your work, not only because it's the coolest brands ever, but because you've got really amazing things on your website. Like I love your philosophy page where you explain your 4 philosophies of what is great research, how is great research conducted, why do great research, and why think tank. I love all the case studies you've got on there. I obviously touted or tooted your horn a little bit for your website, but drop those links on us for listeners that want to go deeper into the world of your work. Where should they go from here?
So it's so interesting because we're actually relaunching our website probably next month, Brian, but thank you for those kind words. So our website is thinktankresearch.com, just like it sounds. And then I'm also really active on LinkedIn as well. So if any of your listeners want to reach out there, I encourage them. It's just Robin Boyar on LinkedIn. And I'm always intrigued to talk to new people and entrepreneurs in general.
Yes, we so appreciate that, Robin. Listeners, you already know the drill. We are including those links down below in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning in. Robin's business website is at thinktankresearch.com. We're also linking to her personal LinkedIn. She's not kidding. She's super active on there, and I love seeing all the awesome stuff that she's posting. You've heard how much she absolutely loves the stuff that she does. So definitely connect with her on LinkedIn. Reach out if you're looking for some help within this domain or you need some advice. You see how generous she is with her time and experience and knowledge. So Robin, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for joining us here on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. It's been really lovely talking with you today. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for your time as well.